Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Students, welcome to our virtual session of week 10 of System Analysis and Design. If you can hear me properly, please raise your hands. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we were talking about architecture design in our face-to-face class, and we were on, I think, slide number 17. So let me give you a brief overview, and then I'll continue from the slide from where I left. So we were talking about architecture design, and architecture design is basically a plans for how the system will be distributed across computers and what will be the hardware and software requirements, and we describe each component in their detail and how we will be placing those components together. In architectural components, we talk about data storage, how data will be stored, data access logic, application logic, and presentation logic. The hardware options are about clients and servers. And in server-based architectures, we mostly use mainframe, mini computer, or microcomputers. And in client-based architectures, you can use terminals, microcomputers, or some special purpose terminals like ATMs, kiosks, etc. The client-server architectures can be implemented in different ways. Like we can have a server-based architecture, or a client-based architecture, or a client-server both-based architecture. In server-based architectures, a client is the lightweight client, which is just a terminal used for input and output only, and all the logics about presentation, application, data access, and the storage of data is done at the server. So the server is doing the most of the tasks, so it is server-based architecture. In client-based architecture, the presentation logic, application logic, and data access logic are implemented on the client, whereas server is only used for data storage. So this is the client-based architecture, where client is the heavier one. Now there is a two-tiered architecture. The client and server both are equally important, and both can be, and the client presentation logic and application logic are implemented, and server data access logic and data storage logics are implemented. And there are certain benefits of client-server architecture, and there are certain limitations as well, which we talked about in our face-to-face class. Now, I told you that there can be a three-tiered architecture in which we add an application server in the middle of client and server, and we implement on the presentation logic at the client, and application logic is implemented at the application server. And we can have a four-tiered architecture as well, where client is implementing the presentation logic, web server is implementing the application logic, and there is an application server which is serving the applications and having part of application logic, and there is a database server which implements data access logic and data storage. Then I ask you in a face-to-face class that you should consider the university registration system of SEU and see that what computing architecture does it use, and what computing architectures would you use if you were replacing it today. So I'll be asking this question from you after the end of this lecture. So in this week you have to study about creation of architecture design. So in a selection of architecture design, lower cost often used to justify the choice of client server, but recommended selection process which is followed is first expand non-functional requirement details and base architecture selection on the detailed non-functional requirements. The operational requirements are also there, which are besides the non-functional requirements. When you talk about operational requirements, like the type of requirements, this is the definition, these are certain examples. For example, the type of requirement, if it is technical requirement, technical environment requirement, definition is like special software, hardware, and network requirements imposed by business requirements. So this is the type of requirement. The example can be the system will work over the web environment with the Internet Explorer. All office locations will have an always-on network connection to enable real-time database updates. So these are the examples of this requirement. And similarly, there are other requirements. There can be requirements about performance, like a speed requirement, the time within which the system must perform its function. So this is a speed requirement. For example, response time must be less than 7 seconds for any transaction over the network. Or there can be capacity requirement, like the total and peak number of users and the volume of data expected. Like there will be maximum of 200 simultaneously users at peak use time. So you are setting a limit on the maximum number of simultaneous users. So this is the capacity requirement. And then there can be requirement about availability and reliability. Like the system should be available 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, with the exception of scheduled maintenance. Like if you are going to perform maintenance activity, you should inform the users well in time. Otherwise, it should be available all the time. And another requirement can be scheduled maintenance should not exceed on 1 6-hour period each month. The system will have 99% uptime performance. So these are the requirements related to performance. The security requirements can be like system value estimates, access control requirements, encryption and authentication requirements, and virus control. So now these are the examples of these security requirements. So I leave this because I ask you to go through these slides on your own, and if you, after reading them, if you still find difficulty, you can ask me about these. So you have to read about all the requirements and their examples. Now the requirements can be about culture and politics, like cultural and political requirements. For example, multilingual requirements. The system will operate in English, French, and Spanish. So this is the multilingual requirement. There can be customization requirements, like country managers will be able to define new fields in the product database to capture country-specific information. So it means you are allowing customization to your system, making unstated norms explicit, like all weight fields will be explicitly identified as being stated in kilograms. Or there can be legal requirements, like personal information about customers cannot be transferred out of European Union countries into the United States. So this is the legal requirement. So you have to take care about all these things. Now when you are designing the architecture, technical environment requirements driven by business requirements often define the application architecture. If not, other non-functional requirements become important. Non-functional requirements and their implication for architecture design for server-based, client-based, thin client server, and thick client servers are having these kinds of requirements. So you can see if there, for example, system integration requirement implication is higher in server-based architecture, thin client, and thick clients. Whereas if we talk about the multilingual requirement, it is having implications on thin client server only. Then once you make plans for your architecture, the next step is to have your hardware and software specification. It is used if new hardware or software must be purchased and communicates the needs for project. Actual acquisition of hardware and software is usually left to a purchasing department, especially in larger firms. So you are just specifying that your system would require the hardware having this specification and software having this specification. So now you just have to specify it correctly. Determine software needs, like which operating system, or it is a special purpose, new trainings required, warranty, what should be the maintenance, like if we are talking about the software, licensing needs. And for hardware, like how many servers, how many clients, what are peripherals required, backup devices required, storage components, how much hard disk space required, and minimum configuration needs. So you specify all these things. Sample hardware or software specification can look like this. For example, for standard client, operating system should be Windows, and the special software can be Mozilla, Real Audio, Adobe Acrobat. The hardware can be 40 gig disk drive, Pentium, 17-inch monitor, network always on broadband, preferred dial-up at 56 kb per second, possible with some performance loss. So these are the requirements for your for the sample system. So in this way, you write specification for your own system as well. So when you are making selection about software and hardware, there are certain factors which are important. Functions and features, what specific functions and features are needed, size of monitor, software features, how fast the software and hardware operates, how well the hardware and software interacts with legacy systems, what are the future migration plans, so which operating system should be selected, which hardware should be selected. So this is important. People are creators of habit and are resistant to change, so changes should be minimized. So you have to decide about these things well in time and very carefully. Now, the three fundamental computing architectures are server-based, client-based, and client-server-based, and select architecture design based on detailed non-functional requirements, and hardware and software specification documents should be prepared according to the needs of your users, need of your client or customer or user. You can call it anything. Okay. Now this was the last slide of this week. This week we have talked about architecture design, about hardware and software specifications, and for this week, as I told you in face-to-face class, that you have got an assignment to do, and I'm now waiting for questions from your hand. If you have any question about this lecture, or if you have any question from the assignments or anything, you can ask me now. Sir, do you have any questions? You have raised hand. So if you have any question, you can type as well. Okay, sir, thank you very much. The lecture is over, but I am available over here if you have any question about this lecture, about any previous lecture, or about your assignment. So you can send me a message and I'll reply you over the chat panel. So I'm turning my microphone off. Thank you very much.